KEDC. So welcome. Let's see. Oops. Thank you, Letitia, for taking care of that recording button. I set myself up. Thank you, Andy, for being here with us this morning. We also have with us Dr. Damian Sweeney with the Kentucky Department of Education. He serves as the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Kentucky Department of Education. Sweeney is also an adjunct professor at Spalding University. With a passion for change and agency and social justice, Dr. Sweeney has served as a special education teacher, English teacher, and high school counselor in Jefferson County Public Schools. Sweeney holds a master's in teaching special education and secondary English from Bellarmine University, along with a master's in education for school counseling and a doctorate in English leadership from the University of Louisville. Dr. Sweeney's wife is Dr. Abigail Sweeney, and they have 3 boys, Smith, Sean, and Parker. Thank you, Dr. Sweeney, for joining us today. We're glad to have you. We also have with us 2 wonderful ladies from the KVEC Co-op, and Johnny can't say enough good about these 2 ladies, Bernadette Carpenter and Brona Francis. They both serve their districts to support in the DEIB work, SEL, MTSS, and their PBIS needs. Thank you, ladies, for joining in this session. Andy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you. When you look at this presentation, and Dr. Sweeney will lead us through it, I do want to mention, that there's probably over 120 combined years of experience with these 4 presenters. And, it's like the old commercial. We know a few things because we've seen a few things over the years. But we feel strongly that the concept and the presentation we have today would be valuable to our schools. At this time, Dr. Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm so pleased to be joined by Andy, Bernadette, and Brana. As Andy said, there's so much experience here, and they have just a wealth of knowledge and have worn so many different hats in the educational world. So ask away, ask questions. They've all done this presentation as well, so I'm going to lead you through it, but my hope is that they'll jump in, and that if you have any pertinent questions or relevant questions for folks with a ton of wisdom, that you'll feel comfortable asking. So real quick, we're going to redefine diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we're going to discuss ways that you can make these concepts meaningful priorities at your schools. You're going to learn strategies to support traditionally underrepresented students and recognize strategies to become data-driven educators. This morning, I was at a high school, and I was working with assistant principals on literally doing all 3 of these things in real time with their school campus. So it's really important that we all have this kind of understanding of DEIB. So obviously, in a virtual world, we can't talk to a neighbor today, but I do want you to think about these 2 quotes. Our team loves Brené Brown, and she says, "You can choose courage or you can choose comfort. You cannot have both." And she also says, courage is contagious, and every time we choose courage, we make everyone around us a little better and the world a little braver. Think about this. Think of yourself as a principal or an assistant principal or a school leader, district leader. Think of yourself as a bison. Bernadette started, I don't know if you were here before the session started, but she talked about the amount of snow that they have in Eastern Kentucky where she is. And she said 7 to 8 inches. If you think about yourself as a bison don't go around the storm, they go through the storm. And that's what these statements are saying, is have the courage to go through the storm and really to discuss openly what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean. You will have people that think that it means something that it doesn't, but having the courage to lead and put these terms at the center of your leadership is going to be paramount. When we talk about diversity, a lot of people want to boil it down to race, but just look at this screen right here. You know, diversity is so much more than a race. It really is about socioeconomic status, right? We're looking at the different income levels of students and making sure that everybody has access and opportunities regardless of those income levels. We're looking at different languages, gender, sexual orientations, gender identity, countries of origin, different abilities, personality and learning styles, as well as cultural, political, religious, or other affiliations. Yesterday in our coaching sessions with a high school, we talked about how diversity is also a difference in perspectives, right? How do you look at the world? How do you come to the world? What lens do you show up to the world from? And then what are the different lenses that your colleagues are showing up from? And then how are you using those different lenses as assets? Okay. So just kind of think about this. How does my school celebrate diversity? How do we celebrate those unique perspectives, those different areas where our students and families and colleagues may be coming from? How do we celebrate that? One of the stories that we loved hearing is there was a school in Western Kentucky that said they had a new sign. They just had a banner put in the front lobby, and the banner simply said, "Welcome, you are welcome here. You are welcome here," is all it said, right? And that little thing allowed people to see that they were welcome members of that school community, regardless of their background, right? So finding unique ways to celebrate diversity is going to be really important. All right, and then equity. I love this definition from our previous commissioner, Dr. Jason Glass. He says, equity in education is fundamentally an effort to ensure that all of our students have the supports they need. Let's go down a little further. An equity focus in education recognizes that public school students come to us with a variety of backgrounds, needs, supports, and experiences, and that we must take those into account when we consider the education of each child. So what this is saying is, each child deserves a personalized education based on their needs, right? We talked today at that school that I mentioned, we talked about a simple semantic switch from saying all and every to saying each student, right?
Yes.
Yep.
That's good.
That's
Yeah,
good.
when you talk about each student, you're really talking about how can we personalize our education for each student's individual needs. Bernadette, did you want to jump in?
No, I do think that's really, well, I guess I am going to jump in, but I do think that's really important to look at each individual child. And I think that's one thing that we've tried to get across is that you have to look at the needs of each child, not, sometimes we can say, well, I offered it to all of them, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But did you provide what each child needed to make them able to do what the best they could do?
Yeah, exactly.
And the key to this as leaders, and I think as we look at our participants here, we've got a group of leaders. It's intentionality. We have to be very intentional when we look at diversity, when we look at equity, and don't assume that we're reaching everyone. We actually have to be very intentional to ensure
Absolutely.
that we do reach everyone. And as leaders, that comes from us. I think that intentionality leads us into the two key parts that's coming up, which is that inclusion and belonging. So, Dr. Sweeney.
Great point.
And I think not just with the students, but I think we as leaders have to look at our staff and make sure that we are doing the same thing for them that we're saying to do for the kids.
Right.
Yeah, so good. So not to belabor the point, but our work with the school is that we're working in today. We work with APs this morning and counselors this afternoon. It's actually we're working on beliefs to behavior. So what beliefs does our staff have that are non-negotiable? This is what we believe about social and emotional learning or academic learning or classroom management or collaboration. And then what do those beliefs, how do we turn those beliefs into action, right? So that's that goes into everything that Andy and Bernadette just said, and being really intentional about that. So a core question to ask with equity is, how does my school ensure all students and stakeholders have equitable access to the supports they need, right? And this is going to really boil down to relationships, which is something that Brana, I know is, she's constantly talking about, right? The importance of relationships and knowing our students. Now, we talk a lot about icebergs, right? And trauma-informed practices. And what we see is above the water, right? That's what we see with students. But in order to really offer equitable access to the support students need, we have to have a better understanding of what's below the iceberg. What can't we see with the naked eye, and what are some ways that we can learn more about that individual student's needs? Brana, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about relationships?
Yeah, you hit it on the nail there, Damien. But one of the things, there's so many different strategies and things that you can get to know your students, and it doesn't take very long. But what you see coming into your building is not, you don't see what they're bringing with them, and you have to find ways to relate to those students, to give them somebody that they know that will support them or will help them, somebody they can talk to. In a school, to have at least one relationship with an adult, it could be they talk to the custodian, or they talk to a cook, somebody that they can have a close connection to, that they feel they can tell them things. But the kids that you see come off the bus, we think we know them, we think we know their background, but until we really know them, until we really get out there and see where they live, what they do, what they're bringing with them, and then we really can't meet their needs.
Yeah, good point. Thank you so much, Rana. Let's go to inclusion. A lot of people try to couple inclusion and belonging together, but you're going to see the difference here. Inclusion is the intentional act of creating an environment that fosters mutually respectful relationships in which, here we go again with that word, each student, regardless of intellectual, social, cultural, and geographic background, is welcome, supported, and valued as fully participating members of society. I go back to when I was a special education teacher. We had our classrooms as special education teachers were in a wing of the building that was kind of off to the side of everybody else. We nor our students felt like truly fully participating members of that school culture, or as if we were valued participating members of that school culture. So inclusion is doing the opposite. It's ensuring that there are no gaps, there are no subgroups, there are no groups that feel that they are unvalued or that they are not considered fully participating members of that school culture. All right. And then we go to this concept of radical inclusion, right? Meaning that we go out of our way to identify individuals and groups who are typically outside our conversations and decision-making processes, and we create supports and intentional structures to involve them. So the core question here is, how is my school inclusive? And is there a way, is there a priority on radical inclusion? Are we going out of our way to find groups that aren't typically part of the conversation? And then how are we finding unique ways to ensure that these student groups are included? And then we have to ask ourselves the hard question of who may feel unincluded and why. And finally, we get to belonging. And this is the degree to which learners believe, experience, and feel that they are accepted by adults and peers, as well as respected as a valued contributor in their learning and social environment, right? So we want to ensure that our kids know you are accepted here. We go back to that banner, you are welcome here, right? And our adults, along with your peers, see you, value your contributions to our school community, and really welcome you here. All right, that is belonging. And our core question to that is, how does my school ensure all students and staff feel a sense of belonging? You go back to our vision statement, and our vision statement is very simple for our team, and that is all students and educators in Kentucky feel a sense of belonging. That's our goal. That's the vision that we have. All right, so we've got to ask ourselves at an individual school level, and as leaders of the school, how do our students and staff feel about this? Do they feel that sense of belonging? And then what happens if we perceive that someone or a group of stakeholders do not feel like they belong?
Well,
All right.
Damien, one thing I'd like to add is that when Bernadette and I first joined this group, this DEIB organization, one of the things I felt was, how do I fit in? You know, how do I bring my knowledge to the table? Now, on the inclusion part, the leadership of the group, Dr. Woods Tucker, Dr. Sweeney, Dr. Fields, all of these folks came together and they began to pull out the conversation. They began to draw us into the conversation. It took, I think Bernadette would agree with me, it took us a little while to join in to the conversation because for us, it was a little bit different than what we may have perceived. But right now, we feel like we're included. We feel like we belong. This is our group. This is what we are doing. And Bernadette, wouldn't you agree that inclusion and belonging was so important for you and I both when we started in this?
It really was. And we go back to that word intentional. You know, I feel like Damien and the other leaders always made sure they were intentional on including us and helping us to understand and helping us with things. And I mean, they're some of my best friends now, you know, so I love being with that group, but we were a little awkward at first because we weren't sure coming from Eastern Kentucky, you know, exactly how we fit in, but it's been wonderful.
Absolutely.
And it's really helped me as an individual to be more conscious of making sure I'm including everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great points. So we're going to give you 3 quick strategies to ensure that you're being inclusive, that you're enhancing that sense of belonging, and that you're aware of diversity, and that you're offering that access and opportunity, access and opportunities through equity as well. The first strategy is a tier 1 strategy, right? So this is something that can be done with whole groups of your staff, but it's going to really be about examining ourselves and self-awareness. And it is easy to feel defensive. And I just want you to know from the outset that nothing about our work is ever about pointing fingers at people. It's never about judging people or telling people that they're wrong or any of that stuff, right? So there's no reason to be defensive about this work. It's really about just reflecting on the fact that we all must have a growth mindset and be lifelong learners. So this requires an inside-out approach. And in order to become culturally proficient, we have to start thinking about, you know, what's the knowledge and the skills and attitudes and beliefs that enable people to work well and respond effectively to and be supportive of people in cross-cultural settings. We even have to be aware of how we as individuals and as organizations work with others and be aware of how we respond to those different from us, right? Somebody comes to you with an issue about not feeling included, right? Or they don't agree with something that you've said or done. How do you respond to that, right? What are the barriers to your response? What are some ways that you can do this in a positive way while also understanding the cultural background of that person that's coming to you? And then it also requires us understanding the visible and not so visible difference, and then preparing to live in a diverse world. We do have to be aware of cognitive dissonance, though. And this simply is something where if we hold 2 conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes, we tend to seek this consistency in our attitudes. Well, I've always believed this, and I know that I have new information that's telling me that maybe my belief system wasn't always correct, but because I've held on to it so long, I'm just going to stick with it and try and ignore everything else, right? So I like this little example on the image here. Animal cruelty is wrong, but also delicious, right? So you've got these 2 conflicting beliefs, Well, now that you've got new information, what are you going to do with that new information that conflicts with something that you've believed for so long? Okay. And then, yeah, go ahead.
That's a struggle for me right there because I love animals and I have a hard time sometimes when I eat meat. So that's kind of what I was like, my God, did they write this about me? But yes, that's so true.
Thank you. Thank you. We can that resonates with many of us. And we know that you also have a Dairy Queen, a love for Dairy Queen in the mornings. No
Yes.
judgment, no judgment on our part. All right. So a key question to ask yourself is, how does cognitive dissonance present itself when it comes to DEIB? And then how can we make sure that those conflicting beliefs aren't things that we just tend to ignore, but that we open ourselves up to new information and new learning, and again, that growth mindset. We must also check in with ourselves by asking ourselves some questions. So one of the things that I used to ask myself, right, we had a large population of emerging bilingual students, right? So I would ask myself, how are my life experiences and values similar and or different from this group of students? I wanted to know. And then how might I build authentic relationships with these students? And that took effort. And as Andy mentioned, it took intentionality. What steps might I take to better understand the experiences of my students? And finally, what do these students need that they aren't getting, and how can I be part of the solution? Does anybody want to jump in here?
I just think if you ask yourself those questions, I'm sorry, Bronna. I just got a little bit. I just think if you ask yourself those questions and the other questions that we have discussed, that would help you to be more intentional. And, I always find that if I put it down, if I have a plan, if we have those discussions, it gets done. If you're not intentional, sometimes you may miss somebody.
I was just going to say, for each of us, we have our own experiences that we know. We know how kids would feel in this situation. But there's a lot of experiences that things that have happened to kids or things that they experience that we don't know. So it's how do we get to know that, and how can we help them in and be a part of the solution, as the Damien said.
Yeah, one of the tools I want to link in later on is called a teacher to student interaction tool. And you literally shadow a student in an underrepresented group for a day and just try and understand like what that lived experience, what that school experience is like, right? Can you do this with a student with a disability, or a neurodiverse student rather, or emerging bilingual student? What is a day in the life like for this student, and what are some positives, and then what are some things that may need to change, right? And then how can you create a connection with that student as well? We all have biases, and this is really, really important that we consider those biases, again, from that growth mindset, knowing that it's something that we all possess regardless of our backgrounds. One thing that I love, one tool that I love is a free tool from Harvard. It's called Harvard Project Implicit. It's a simple Google, and you can take a little survey. It's going to spit out your perceived biases, and those are just things that you can work on. All right. Now, our second strategy is just doing the work and building our cultural proficiency. And this is a tier 2 strategy. So something that we're going to do really in small groups or individually. But the first thing that I like to do is I really like to reflect on the organization, right? And again, this is with no judgment or preconceived notions. But are we at this? Where are we on this continuum? Are we at that cultural blindness pillar where we see the difference and act like we don't? Or are we at the cultural precompetence where we see the difference and at times respond inappropriately? And then how can we find our way to move up? What work do we have to do in order to move up to that cultural competence and cultural proficiency, those two columns? Okay, so really reflecting on our organizations is going to be important. And then we should also lean into the discomfort, right? Nothing about this work is necessarily comfortable, but again, but it is necessary. It's necessary to do this work. So center your work on the voices of others, especially those traditionally at the margins, right? One of the plans that we're working on with the school is how can we listen more to students from low-income areas? How can we listen more to our neurodiverse students or and their families, or our emerging bilingual students? How can we listen more than we speak, right? We don't have all the answers and we don't know everything about those cultural backgrounds, but it's time to listen and learn. Two of our favorite books for our team has been Street Data and Coaching for Equity. So those are really good starting points. Be an ally for folks, right? You may not be able to fully understand, but you can show empathy and have that desire to learn, and then learn productive ways you can advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. You can always create affinity and non-affinity groups to learn, and then you can always attend events in the community with different people, lived experiences than our own. All right, I really want to focus on the wisdom that we have here. So I'm just going to quickly show you. I want you to see just one thing real quick because we're running out of time. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself when we talk about necessary conversations, right? Does every single student at our school have a trusted adult? There's something called relationship mapping. If you want to learn more about that tool, email me, right? We can send you a 1-minute video about relationship mapping, and it will help you really understand whether or not your students have a trusted adult in the building. When our students walk into our school, do they see themselves reflected in our staff? And if our school is in a predominantly majority community, are we intentionally introducing our students to diverse voices? Do our students see themselves represented on the walls of the hallways and classrooms? Do they see themselves represented in the curriculum? What's the history behind our school name or mascot? Do they have a positive or negative effect on some? And then do our families feel welcome at our school? Why or why not? And has there been a history of oppression in our community that still affects our students and families? Right? Last concept I want to do before I stop sharing, and I want you to ask questions to Brana, Andy, and Bernadette, is there are 3 concepts that all of our schools should really put into place. Students should learn about and from diverse cultures or perspectives through windows. Through mirrors, students should see and experience authentic representations of themselves that affirm their identities. And finally, through sliding doors, students should be able to immerse themselves in whole new, exciting worlds because they're highly engaged. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm very curious as to whether or not you have questions for my friends here. And I hope this information has been helpful to you. Right. While folks are thinking of questions, Andy, Bernadette, Brana, is there anything you'd like to add? Letitia's been she's also a huge part of our team as well. Anything anybody wants to add about your own experiences?
Right. I would definitely highlight the fact that we're all available. Our contact information is available out there, so feel free to contact us if you have any questions. I think the key here is, as a leader, challenging yourself to look inward and to ensure, our goal should always be that our staff, our students, our community feel like they're included and belonging. And I think Damien highlighted one thing there just a second ago, and that is, do our parents feel welcome? Does our community feel welcome in our schools? I think that's so important that we create activities and do an outreach to ensure that we try everything within our power to allow and really challenge our community to be part of our school, our parents and so forth.
I think a lot of parents, the experiences that they had in school, that's what they take with them to the school that their kids go to. Well, when I was in school, they didn't treat me right, and they still have that. They still have that feeling. And so I think we have to really, and genuinely invite them in and make them part of the school. Talk to them, get their ideas, not just the it group or whatever you want to call them, but we have to reach out to all of them and dispel those preconceived notions that they have about school.
I agree.
With that, I'll just add that because some of our families did not have good school experiences, there's reluctance to go to the school. So we've seen with family engagement that there are some schools that will have a family night at a local community center, a local faith-based organization in the community, et cetera. And there can be more family engagement in those ways.
Yeah, and I always, my front staff always made sure that they understood how important it was that they welcomed everyone into that building, because sometimes those parents, they're dreading coming in anyway. And if you don't treat them with total respect, then they're going to be turned off. It just makes them not want to come even more. It makes them not want to work with you. They don't, so it's very important how you treat them. Even if you're you should treat those poor ones just as well as you treat the ones that have wealth or any type of diversity. Also, I think it's so important that we do have those relationships and that we advocate for those students. I think that's some of them don't have anybody to advocate for them. So that's our job to do that.
Yeah, I think a big misconception about parents that we have and that other parents have about other families is that they don't care about their kid. They don't care if their kid gets a good education or and that's not true. I mean, and people think that if they don't have money or if their kids are not coming to school they just don't care. And that is just so not true. And that's something that I think we have to fight with our teachers too. And I don't want to say that like fight with your teachers, but that's something to say, well, and I noticed in that grid that Damien had on there that it says, well, they never come to the school. They're the ones that we need to see, but they're not going to show up. And I know if you've ever taught in the school for very long, and we've been in it 40 years, oh gosh, yeah. But anyway, you've heard a teacher say that. You have heard somebody say that. And I mean, that's just my spiel that we have to really work hard and like Andy says, intentionally.
Yes,
Absolutely.
intentional is the word. Yeah. Well, folks, thank you so much for being part of our session. I'd like to thank Andy for bringing us all together, and definitely thank Bernadette and Brana for co-presenting with me, Letitia and Deanna. Thank you as well for facilitating and hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr.
guys.
guys.
Thank